Ang amoebiasis ay isang communicable disease na galing sa parasite na tinatawag natin na Amoebiasis. Kadalasan, sa bituka o kulon ang unang naapektuhan ng amoebiasis at may tatlo tayong anyo ng sakit ng amoebiasis. Una, asymptomatic infection. Halos 90% ng tao na may amoeba ay walang nararamdamang sintomas. Ibig sabihin, wala silang nararamdamang sintomas ni isa, pero carrier sila. Pero nakakahawa pa rin, kahit wala silang nararamdamang sakit. Pangalawa, meron tayong intestinal amoebiasis. So, ito yung may sintomas na tulad ng dysentery. Mamaya tatalakayan natin kung ano yung dysentery. O madalas na pagtatae na may dugo at mucus. Ayan, pananakit ng tiyan at hirap sa pagdumi. So, ang dysentery, is an infection ng intestine natin na nagkukos ng severe diarrhea with blood and mucus in the stool. So, it is usually accompanied by abdominal pain, meron na ring fever, and tenesmus, ibig sabihin, staining while defecating. Pangatlo, meron tayong extra-intestinal amoebiasis. So, kapag kumalat na sa labas ng bituka, madalas sa atay or liver abscess, minsan sa baga na at sobrang bihira pero delikado, kapag umaakot na sa utak na. Let's proceed with the causative agent of amoebiasis. It is an Amoebiasis, a parasite that lives in the intestine, and it has two important forms. The first one, we have the cyst. Okay, it is the infective stage. So, ito yung matibay, na form. Kaya niyang mabuhay sa tubig, sa lupa. Nakukuha natin kapag umiinom tayo ng tubig, kumakain tayo ng mga pagkain, or mga contaminated food and water. Okay, so, ang mature cyst ay may 4 na nuclei at ito ang nagiging simula ng infection. Pangalawa, meron tayong tinatawag na trophozoite. Okay, this is the invasive stage. So, ito yung active form ng parasite. Ang nangyayari dito siya gumagalaw at nananakit ng bituka. So, nagdudulot siya ng mga ulcers, necrosis, and of course, bleedings of colons, kapag nakapasok na sa dugo, pwede siyang kumalat sa liver, lungs, and even your brain, di ba? At magdulot ng mas malalang sakit. Okay, let us now go and proceed. Amoebiasis spreads mainly through fecal-oral route. This means that the parasite cysts, which are passing the stool of an infected person, can get into food or water that another person consumes. Okay, so if we drink dirty water or eat contaminated food, especially fruits, vegetables, or was not properly washed, we can swallow this cyst. Okay, so in some rural areas, crops are fertilized with human waste called night soil, which increases the risk of amoebiasis. We also have poor hygiene, like not washing hands after using the toilet also spreads the disease from person to person. We also have insects like flies and cockroaches can land on feces, pick up cysts, so they can transfer them to food and utensils, right? And of course, lastly, in some high groups, it can spread through anal or oral anal sexual practices. For its incubation period, the incubation period is the time between swallowing the parasite cyst and when the symptoms starts to appear. So for amoebiasis, this usually takes 2 to 4 weeks. However, in some cases, it may be as short as a few days, as long as several months. And then the length of the incubation depends on 3 main factors. Okay, so we have 3 main factors. The first one is the host immunity. Okay, so if the person or person's immune system is strong, the infection may take longer to show or remain asymptomatic. Okay, so kailangan niya ng malakas, na pangangatawan para mag-remain na asymptomatic pa rin, Number 2, we have the parasite virulence. So some strains of Amoebiasis are more aggressive and can cause symptoms faster. Okay, so may mga mahihinang katawan, kaya mas kumakalat ng mabilisan sa katawan nila. We also have nutritional status. Malnourished individuals often shows symptoms earlier and more severely because their bodies are weaker. Ayan, mga malnourished na person, mas madali silang tamaan ng sakit na to. So, not everyone who swallows the parasite will get sick right away. Sometimes, the infection stays silent for weeks before symptoms appear. For its signs and symptoms, well, most people infected with Amoebiasis don't show symptoms. About 90% are just carriers. But when symptoms appear, they fall into two groups, which is the intestinal and extra-intestinal. For intestinal, Amoebiasis happens in the colon. The most common form is amoebic colitis. So where the patient develops diarrhea, ayan, may diarrhea na, with blood and mucus, accompanied by abdominal pain and prompting. Ayan. So, sumasakit na yung tiyan ni patient, no? And they may also experience tenesmus, ayan, which is the painful urge to pass stool even when there's little or nothing left. So, if the infection becomes chronic, it can look like inflammatory bowel disease or what we call IBD, making diagnostic tricky. On the other hand, for the extra-intestinal amoebiasis, occurs when the parasite spreads outside the intestine. So wala na siya sa loob ng intestine, no? Nasa ibang parts na siya. So the most common is amoebic liver abscess, or what we call ALL. Patients present with fevers, chills, night sweats, and pain in the right upper abdomen. A classic sign doctors look for is anchovy paste pus when the abscess is drained. So if the liver abscess ruptures through the diaphragm, it can reach the lungs, causing chest pain. Ayan, sakit na yung chest niya, no? May cough na rin siya, and pleural effusion, ayan, fluid in the lungs. So marami ng fluid sa lungs niya. So in very rare cases, it spreads to the brain, causing seizures, confusion, and neurological deficits, which is often fatal. So to summarize, intestinal symptoms mostly involve diarrhea and abdominal pain, while extra-intestinal symptoms involve serious organ damage, especially in the liver. For its pathognomonic signs, the findings are that are unique to a specific disease in amoebiasis. There are two important ones. The first one is the flask-shaped ulcers in the intestine. When the doctors look at the intestinal wall under a microscope, they see ulcers shaped like a flask. It is narrow neck, wider base. This is very characteristic of Amoeba histolytica infection. For the second one, we have the trophozoites with ingested red blood cells. So when examining stool samples under the microscope, the doctors may see the parasite actively eating red blood cells. This is considered a strong diagnostic clue because only E. histolytica does this. And to confirm if a patient has amoebiasis, several tests can be used. First one is we have stool microscopy. This is the simplest and most common test. So doctors look at the stool sample under the microscope to find cysts or the ineffective form, or trophozoites, the active form. So if they see trophozoites with red blood cells inside, that is clear sign of E. histolytica. The second one is the antigen detection test or the ELISA rapid test. These are more modern and accurate. They detect parasite proteins, antigens in the stool, which helps confirm infection quickly. We also have the PCR or the polymerase chain reaction. This is the gold standard because it can differentiate between the harmful E. histolytica and the harmless E. dispar. So both look the same under a microscope, but only PCR can tell the difference. We also have the serology or the blood test. This test can detect antibodies that the body produces against the parasite. So it is especially useful for diagnosing liver abscesses and other extra-intestinal forms of the diseases. And of course, the last one, we have the imaging or the ultrasounds, CT, MRI. This test helps the doctors see if the parasite has caused liver abscesses or spread to the other organs. They don't directly see the parasite, but they show the damage that is caused.
And these are the preventive measurements as well as the health teachings. To summarize, let us watch the life cycle of the Amoebiasis.
Amoeba histolytica are pathogenic amoeba that falls under the phylum Protozoa, the class Sarcodina, and the order Labosa. It is widely known for causing intestinal and extraintestinal infections in human beings. The life cycle of Entamoeba histolytica begins by an ingestion of mature cysts through fecally contaminated water or food, and which will then an infection occurs. When the cyst enters the ileum of the small intestine of the host, the process of excisation begins. Excisation is the process by which cysts transform into trophozoites. Trophozoites are released in the small intestine, and from here, they migrate to the large intestine. Trophozoites are unicellular parasites that measure from 14 to 18 millimeters in diameter. They multiply in the small intestine by binary fission to produce cysts that exit via human stool.
And yeah, that's the end of this contagious disease, which is the Amoebiasis. Thank you for watching.